Hello and welcome to Steve and Dave's Song Stories. This is our fourth episode, and this time around we're going to be talking about Elton John's Someone Saved My Life Tonight. Steve, maybe we can talk a little bit about the album and the single first before we actually talk about the story behind them.
Well, why don't you tee up the album then? And so this is from the classic period when John and Taupin were hitting on all cylinders. Well, wait, yeah, go. So this comes from the album. What?
This is from the album Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy, their ninth studio album, and kind of fascinating because this is a concept album in which they chose to tell the prehistory of
that's right.
of their career as successful singer-songwriters, right? As a successful team.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
This was about the years of struggle and doubt and desperation. And the song we're going to be talking about today, Someone Saved My Life Tonight, ends the first half, the first side of the album. In the original, anyway, they've released some things and have added some supplementary material now, but in the original, it was the song that ended the first side.
Considered quite a bold stroke at the time, right? That this topic, this subject matter, and in the wake of albums such as Yellow Brick Road by Yellow Brick Road, this album came up maybe a little short. I think there was critical praise, but it was not the massive seller.
No. I'm afraid you've got that massively wrong.
Is that right?
Yes. This was released in May 1975, and just based on pre-release orders alone, it went gold. It was certified gold before it even came out. And that had never happened before.
Well, that's based upon Yellow Brick Road.
Well, as that may be.
I mean, right?
As that may be. But the fact is, this album entered the album chart at number one, which had also never happened before. So before anyone had even heard the thing, it was massively popular, at least in terms of sales. It was one of their most successful, and it stayed at number one for 7 weeks, right? So before it was already a huge, phenomenal success before it even came out.
That's really interesting, given that it really yields only one single. I mean, in its original
This format. Is the only single. Yes, the song we're talking about today is the only single from this album. It was a single. It was over 6 minutes long, and you know, on AM radio, it's not the sort of thing you did. You know, there are very few exceptions to that. Think of Bridge Over Troubled Water, Hey Jude.
Well,
like Rolling Stones, things like that, but just really, it's the exception.
Well, that is the exception, but again, this is where Elton John is at right at this point, right? He is the sort of the king of the castle, and so people are hungry to hear what the latest thing is. And I will submit,
the record company says we need to shorten it to get a radio version out. He said no. And
who are you to tell me what to do, right?
Yeah, and they had to just swallow it, you know. So
yeah, I mean, and so I think it is, well, again, it is an important album in the 70s. It is not anywhere close to his best album, but nevertheless, it yields an interesting single. You're kind of against hype a little bit. It is, I mean, we mentioned Hey Jude. a second ago.
Right.
It sort of fits into that dirge like. Yeah, there's just something about it that is that's unusual.
Well, I think it's like the others in the sense that it's almost a type of anthem, right?
Well, for some people saw it that way for sure. Yeah.
And but again, just to get back to the album for a second, I think you're right. A lot of critics are not going to place this in the top 3 or maybe even top 5 of his albums. However, it sold almost 1.5 million copies within 4 days of its release. It eventually went triple platinum. So
again, I'm not going to go to the mat with my, antagonizing you about this album, but I think it's one of those albums that benefited greatly from its predecessor. I mean, tremendously. It sort of flowed along in the wake of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road. And I think when people got done playing it, they put it on the shelf so they didn't spin it again. I mean, really only a couple of tracks stand out in the decade since, from my perspective. I think the title track is genius.
Well,
but
the people who were involved were very fond of it, extremely fond of it. I think Dee Murray says that the vocal work of the Elton John band on the single was the best that they had ever done in his opinion.
Yeah,
and that's saying something, right?
That's saying something, but I think that's absolutely right. I mean, that this is the band at their peak.
Gus Duncan,
no question about that.
Was said that he had more fun producing this album than any of the other ones. So at least the people who were making it were really into what they were doing. All right, so for whatever that's worth.
Well, it's probably worth something. But again, it's worth something.
It's worth pointing out that this is the last time that the last album in the 70s that was made with the Elton John band. Murray and Olsen.
This is the real story, I think.
Were fired.
This is the real story. Yes.
And that's so Rock of the Westies was no longer supported by the Elton John band. David Johnston was still there, but that's incredible, especially because they had performed so well on this album. It's I don't know what the background is. I don't know what the story is behind that. But they would not come back together again until Too Low for Zero, 1983.
That's right. There's a lot of kind of haziness that surrounds their dismissal, and it was a wound. I think it probably even remains a wound for Nigel Olsen, maybe on some level. But the Elton John trio, that's Murray and Olsen were with Elton John at the Troubadour, right, in L.A. during the debut, the Halcyon early years.
The breakthrough, right?
Yeah. To me, it's inexplicable because that band, it was never better, and you have Ray Cooper on percussion and stuff. It was the best thing going, and then to let those guys go is it's inexplicable.
Yeah, it seems very strange.
Well, it does seem very strange. But I mean, Elton John, I mean, to be fair, in the 70s was increasingly mercurial.
Maybe it has something to do with drug use or whatever.
Yeah. I think it's just how he's wired a little bit too.
One more word about the critical reception. This album was ranked number 158 on the 500 greatest albums of all time list from the Rolling Stones. And that's on the original 2003 list and again on the revised 2012 list. So were there albums that were higher on the list? Yes. But
yes, several. But it's fine. I mean, I'm not here to I'm not here to rain on Elton John's parade, but it was I remember when it was released, it was very much a kind of departure. People weren't quite sure what to do with it. Where were the singles? That kind of thing. Um, and in the wake of which again, anything would suffer by comparison in the wake of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, which, it's in the argument for one of the greatest albums of all time. And every song on that album, every song is extraordinary. Yeah, okay. Captain Fantastic. Yeah, okay.
All right.
All right.
To the single. This was the only single from that album. And I said it's over 6 minutes. It was nearly 7 minutes long. It remains his longest single to date. The B-side was House of Cards, which Elton John, a lot of groups will take some other cut from an album to put on their B-side, and he just didn't do that. His singles were nearly all independent productions for the B-side, and
yeah, this is
not found elsewhere.
This is strategic. I think you're right. This was reasonably unusual, relatively unusual, but strategically it made those singles even more valuable for ardent fans, and increased their value up over the years, right? Because then you would have to, for completists, then would want to kind of track down these singles and track down these B-sides. It's amazing that everybody didn't do this, but it is unusual.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't have the material. Who knows? But yeah,
the single peaked at number 4 in early September. When it entered the chart at number 51 on July 5th. Yeah. Having been released on June 23rd. And it peaked at number 4 in early September, just a week before Island Girl was released. So he was staying on the charts, no question about it. But
he was,
interestingly enough, it was certified gold at almost the same time that it reached number 4 in early September.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah, after just 2 months of the charts. So
again,
very successful. But I don't know if you want to share anything more about that before we get to the story.
No, I don't have much more to share about it. I think I've already put my cards on the table. It's one of my least favorite popular Elton John songs, and I think you could come up with 50 other Elton John songs that are better. I think I would take the entire Tumbleweed Connection album and Yellow Brick Road before I would pick up this song. Okay, nevertheless, we're not here to listen to me jump up and down about this. That we should think about, in keeping with the album's theme of the tough early days. Well, this song captures an episode, right? An episode in the romantic life of young Elton. Elton John, Reg Dwight, wasn't exactly an overnight sensation, which is always the case, right? So he, for several years during the 60s, sort of sought a home, bounced around from band to band, worked with various publishing companies.
Chris Blackwell took a pass on him.
That's right.
For instance.
Blackwell didn't make many mistakes, but I think that's probably one by Blackwell's own admission. But I think we're looking here at Bluesology.
Yes, that's exactly right. So the group that he was playing with shortly before this episode. In fact, he met the woman involved, Lisa Woodrow, while playing with Bluesology, and we see Reg there on the right in what looks like an extremely uncomfortable pose, and behind him, who is that, Steve?
Well, it looks like the one, the only Long John Baldry, who was a kind of almost a kind of Zelig figure in the 60s in the UK.
He was
Who was
everywhere in the
a
blues
he was
scene.
everywhere, and hail fellow well met. I think you'd have to go long and far to find somebody to say a bad word about Long John Baldry.
Yes.
But again, somebody who was deeply inspired by the blues, as were many British musicians in this era.
Well,
Muddy Waters, in
and
particular,
people
was
in the
his favorite.
know will say that he was one of the
I think that's
pioneers
right. Yes.
of British
Yes.
blues. And that's saying something when you consider that
Oh, you got that right.
many of the rock bands that we idolize today all started off aspiring to be blues bands, right? If you talk about the Rolling Stones or the Who or Cream, whoever,
That's right.
Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah.
Back then, it was about being a blues band, and
yeah, there was. That's exactly right. I think that has been. I think it's kind of been forgotten over time. I mean, aficionados are well aware of this, but the American blues were enormously popular, and quite frankly, right, these British bands then reintroduced the American blues tradition to American audiences. American audiences for the first time heard songs from Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and whatnot from from groups like the Rolling Stones, for example, as you mentioned. And Baldry is really at the center of this.
yeah,
He's obviously a lanky fellow. He is but he's also a person who has a certain kind of, not exactly what if it's the kind of charisma, but he has the people like him. He also is a very interesting and astute judge of talent, and there's a couple of clear examples of that. But bluesology,
well, he discovered Rod Stewart, for instance,
right? Well, and Rod Stewart, till Baldry's very end. I mean, Rod Stewart was so grateful to what Baldry provided him, and it was in fact Stewart who was there when Baldry passed, paid for his palliative care as an old man in 2005. I mean, right? It's amazing the kinds of connections that Baldry made during the 60s. And I think again, he's a kind of hidden figure, but I mean, I think it's surprising, I think, to some people that he didn't break out in the way that some of the other performers did, because he was considered, not only we said he was very, had a great stage presence as well. I mean, people enjoyed listening to him, and he was very popular for decades, but always just kind of bubbled under the surface.
Very, very much in demand. So if he wasn't heading up his own group, there were all sorts of groups after him to try to get them into their. So yeah, he was influential, popular.
It's to look at this photograph, it is almost jarring to see Elton John as part of a band and conforming in that way. That Elton John seems to have long been a kind of singular individual and a kind of singular talent, and a person who was just sort of born to sort of go out on his own. But yeah, he paid his dues, right? He paid his dues, and I think he was deeply appreciative of the bluesology experience, particularly the connection with Baldry. And again, this is where his name, moniker, comes from his time with the band.
Yeah, I think that alone speaks for the fondness that he had for that group. You want to just fill that out?
So the sax player. Oh no, the sax player. Help me out.
Elton Dean.
Elton Dean. Yeah, Elton Dean. And so when Reg Dwight starts on his own, he takes the name, right, Elton and John, and creates a new moniker. And again, I think that's a kind of lasting homage to his time in bluesology.
Yeah, and he essentially left. Well, Baldry had one big hit in his career.
Yeah.
And that was in 67.
Right.
But strangely enough, bluesology was pretty much bracketed out of that. They didn't play on it. They didn't do background
It's
vocals,
strange. Yeah.
nothing.
And probably
And
not
so,
well, not appreciated either on some level. Yeah.
well, certainly Reginald saw that and did not see his career advancing through bluesology.
Right.
So he left the group. Clearly, it was a friendly break.
Oh, I think that's right.
Because
Yes.
he continued to have a very close friendship with Baldry. But before we leave bluesology in the story, I think we should mention the fact that this story got its start during a bluesology performance or at a bar where they were performing. Do you know anything about how that came about? What
I
happened?
know very little. I know very little about the initial encounter.
They were playing at a nightclub called Fiesta in Sheffield, and a local guy, a very short man, shorter than Elton John, in fact, who called himself
So, sure.
the Mighty Atom. He was a DJ at a local Locarno ballroom. Had as his date a skinny blonde girl named Linda. I think I called her Lisa before. Linda. Anyway, they weren't together very long. Apparently, the Mighty Atom would beat Linda on a regular basis, although he was much smaller than she was. She was just shy of 6 feet, so it was a very strange, type of.
Well, okay, yeah.
But anyway, She talked to Reg, and they quickly hit it off, and then she would travel around with him. They're just kind of following the bluesology tour, and at the end of the tour, just before Christmas, Reg announced that he was leaving the band. But by that point, they were already an item.
Yeah.
So
they were. That's right. It's sort of the grand tradition of bands in the 60s and the 70s that there were well, groupies, right? And that oftentimes band members would pair off with these fans who adored them and also oftentimes traveled along with them. So, I mean, and it seems a little jarring knowing what we know about Elton John in terms of his of his sexuality, but at this point, right, he's still a closeted man, and I think even by his own admission, a bit confused about his own sexuality, and it was obviously a very different era as well. What year is this, by the way, that they pair off?
This is around Christmas, the end of 1967. Reginald decides to leave bluesology, decides that he is going to go out and try a solo career as Elton John. So this is one of the first pictures of Elton John. And
kind of an interesting mix of conventional and outlandishness on some level.
Yeah. And I wonder if he wasn't a bit inspired by Baldry, who also had that type of.
That's right. Yeah, Baldry was always described as always a man with a tie.
Something of a dandy.
Something of a something of a dandy.
And this is clearly a different look than we just saw. Sure. Reginald Dwight. So, well, we have one more here. Same session, right?
Oh, well, but we have the coat.
The coat is on. A little coy over the shoulder look, and All right,
Jeez.
but he and Linda are now an item, and this
Right.
shows Linda in a much more recent
Yeah,
picture,
decades later.
decades later, probably in Texas at this point.
That's right. I
Linda
think that's
would
right.
end up marrying 4 times. So he probably could have just as well married her and divorced her after a couple of years and not have been any worse for wear. But
But when they become a couple, and when they get their own place, and when Taupin then moves in, this is the start. It's the start of a couple of things. It's the start of a kind of a real working relationship between Taupin and John, who have been paired earlier by a chance meeting at a record company, at a publishing company. But they're sorting out how they're going to kind of advance as a team.
right,
And right, there's also this domestic piece of it, which the relationship, and there's um,
this is the
the
apartment in
apartment.
question.
Yeah,
Yeah,
this is the apartment. In the relationship, the coupling is also kind of underway and going at a pace, right? And so they're no longer, well, they become engaged.
right. Yes, this all happens relatively fast,
Relatively fast. Yeah.
and in fact, um, just a couple of weeks before the marriage is supposed to happen, he writes to a friend of his, an old school friend, uh, quote, "Just a few lines to let you know I'm getting married on 22nd June at Uxbridge Registry offices.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you think it's a bit sudden, you're right. Seeing as we were living together, we thought as well get married. Nothing much happening record-wise because I've got problems with my record company at the moment. Reg," end quote. That this was written on June 7th, inviting his friend to a wedding on June 22nd. Now, what we're going to be talking about, the events that we're going to be talking about, happened somewhere in between, somewhere in the next
That's
2
right.
weeks, right?
That's right. So yeah, essentially a kind of 2 week period. I mean, life changing events on a number of levels. I mean, and so this is one of the things that makes this song so, I guess, so compelling is that you can argue that this is a kind of pivot point for Elton John.
Oh, and let me just say, because the lyrics make reference to the East End lights. When I think of those East End lights, it's East End because this apartment that we're looking at here was on the corner of Liverpool Road and Furlong Road in the Highbury district of Islington, London. So that's
That's the
where
estate.
that's to be found in London. Taupin says later it was the pits. It's a very uptown sort of location now. 50 years ago, 55 years ago, that was not the case. And you can see, I think, looking at this, that this is not, it's not high-end uptown sort of address.
I think that's fair. Yeah, it was pretty grim then, and this place remains, I think, relatively grim. And sort of in keeping, I mean, so again, the lore is that all this begins to unravel relatively quickly, and to some degree, sort of the setting is appropriate. You know, the kind of, you know,
Yes,
the,
it's 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 dim and it's dark, and according to both Toppin and John, that reflected the inner being of at least the two males who were living there, Bernie was absolutely intimidated by Linda, and just tried to kind of avoid her, and compared to like walking on eggs, not wanting to make any waves.
Right. But I mean, but not that many people do this, but to be fair to her, I mean, it is an unusual situation, right? Where that the old three is a crowd kind of deal. It had to be at best awkward.
Well, and she was financing all of them. She
yes, that's
was paying
right.
the bills.
That's absolutely right.
Because clearly neither one of them had any money, and she was an heiress. So at least would be inheriting quite a bit of money, and she even bought the wedding rings.
Right. Famously purchased her own engagement ring, and which, I mean, again, very unconventional in the era.
Well, and the fact that they were living together, okay, 1968, perhaps not as shocking as it would have been even 10 years earlier, but according to Bernie, they weren't sleeping together. I mean, they were not having sex. So it was, that part of it was a very traditional, although it probably had more to do with Elton's complete apathy about
this is the thing
living with a woman than it did with tradition.
Right. I think that's clearly that's definitely a reading that I would have as well.
But there was not a piano in this place.
This is the thing. Yeah, it just for musicians and for aspiring songwriters, I mean, it's like it's the most inappropriate place imaginable.
There was nothing for them there. So what's going on is we have two guys who have no money and are starting to feel a bit desperate about their career. They put out a single in early 1968 that went nowhere, just absolutely flopped. So you add that to the overall thing, and it's no wonder that at some point Elton John attempted suicide, although that's quite a story in itself. Went through the motions of a suicide attempt anyway.
Certainly,
certainly the details of that.
Not very much, but a kind of cry for help. But
yes, certainly a cry for help. Certainly showing the desperation that he was feeling, not knowing how he was going to get out of a dead end situation, both professionally and romantically. But apparently, the story that she tells is that both she and Bernie had been taking afternoon naps, and they both got up and came into the kitchen at the same time because they thought they had heard a noise. And what they discovered is Elton with his head in the oven. Trying to commit suicide. Bernie goes and pulls him out of the oven right away and lays him on the floor, and then notices that the window is wide open.
Well,
and he starts laughing. The gas setting is on low.
Well,
there's a nice little pillow inside the oven.
Well,
to lay his head.
Exactly.
Her only reaction.
The Sylvia Plath imitation could go so far. Yeah.
Yeah. Her reaction to the whole thing was that it was a waste of good gas.
there's a point to be made there.
At
But
least not at least not much gas was wasted. It was
not
on
much.
it was on
Exactly.
the
We'll say what we say a thrifty attempt. Well,
so
he's considerate. He wanted to, he didn't want to kill everybody in the apartment.
well he
Open the window.
arguably didn't even want to kill himself, but I think he
I
did
think
want to
that's
make
right.
people make it clear to people that he was feeling like at the end of his rope.
I think absolutely right. Absolutely right.
If you there are different accounts of this, but if you take a look at Taupin's account, um, the evening in question, the evening that is talked about in the song, followed that incident more or less immediately.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
That's basic. Yes.
So do you want to say a little bit about that? What happened when the two of them went out that night? The two of them being Bernie Taupin and Elton John. They leave the
Well,
apartment.
isn't this the case where Taupin confronts him?
Well, yes, and recruits some help in that, right?
Well, so yeah, he leans on the longtime companion and kind of mentor, and that's Baldry, right?
Yes.
And so I think it's not completely clear to me, even after having read Taupin's autobiography recently, the need for Baldry, apart from just an additional kind of trusted reinforcement. But I think this was a difficult, actually kind of set of conversations, because on one hand, it's the notion that this relationship, this woman is probably not right for you. And it's also the notion that there probably aren't any women who are right for you, right? It's that there is a kind of subtext between them anyway, that is complicated, regarding their affection. And
you're right.
So
between
Taupin
Long
and
John
Taupin, between Taupin and John, in terms of they had a series of kind of cross signals early in their relationship. It's still, I mean, this is the late 60s. These are still difficult conversations to have in terms of sexuality, and in terms of coming out. And so is this, in part, this is a question, this is not the right person, and this is not the right time. But it's also a more broader kind of construct about that who are you inside? What is the, who is the real you? And so this, I think, is why it's so useful to have Baldry present and engaged in this.
Well,
I mean, it's very complex in its way.
The whole thing is more complex and more difficult, due to the fact that up until 1967-68, homosexuality was illegal.
That's exactly right.
And Oscar Wilde went to prison for being a homosexual.
Well, and still actively prosecuted into the 60s. I mean, not just that laws were on the books, that people were still losing their careers, even quite famous people suggesting Wilde. But I mean, even British politicians were being hounded out of office in the 60s. So, I mean, it was really an explosive topic in a way. It could have almost a career-ending topic. I mean,
so
this kind of direction.
Even if it was legal, it was not necessarily acceptable.
This is right. That's exactly right.
But again, its legality was also completely new at the time period that we're talking about.
Well, and legal, and there was, and then I think John's upbringing was conventional, and I think this realization, I just think it was difficult for Elton John on a personal level to come to this realization in terms of sexuality, which he would then not fully embrace for another decade. I mean, or maybe decade and a half, right? he famously weds
Yes,
later
like
for several years. It's
1983 or something like
yeah,
that.
it's
So
yeah. This is
he first comes out as bisexual. Right?
yes, right. In
That's
it, which was again, even in that era, was quite edgy, and
but fit into the glam scene just fine.
it
I mean,
certainly fit into the glam scene, and it certainly fit into the kind of the kind of image that he had cultivated for a long time. But to be to be openly gay, well, that was certainly a bridge too far in the 60s, and was really a difficult thing for him to take on until much later.
what,
Man, this is a complex evening.
yes, and
This is
when we're talking about the um, clearly we have people here who are trying to talk him out of marriage. She's wrong for you. You're not in
talking
love
about
with her.
marriage, right?
All right.
That's right.
To what extent homosexuality was a theme or a topic of that conversation, it's not entirely clear.
It's not
But
entirely clear.
John later said, quote, "I cannot believe I never realized that he was gay," Lon John Baldry. I mean, I didn't realize I was gay at the time. But looking back on it now, John couldn't have been any more gay if he tried. End quote.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
This, not only was his awareness of his sexuality deeply repressed, but his gaydar wasn't even reliable.
Well, I think that's right. No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the kind of worldview had not really taken shape yet, and so to be able to understand not only yourself but understand this world in the context of others is, yeah, this is, I think, something that we lose sight of again in the 21st century. The we're in a different place culturally, whether you're talking about the UK or the United States. But man, this era was convoluted when it came to homosexuality and the notions of coming out. Convoluted. Oh, here we go. Yeah.
So the evening in question took place at the Bag of Nails.
That's unbelievable name.
And it was apparently a long and a very wet evening.
Yes.
And at the very least, Elton got very drunk. It's interesting to note just because it's kind of celebrity gossip sort of thing. But at some point, Bernie and Elton and Long John were actually joined by Cindy Birdsong and
Yes.
PJ Proby. Do you know who PJ Proby was?
I don't know who PJ Proby is. Birdsong is the Supremes.
One of the Supremes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Who I don't the other person I don't that doesn't ring a bell.
PJ Proby is a minor celebrity, a singer with some again minor hits. But he was there too. So for what that's worth.
Yeah.
And let's see here. Here we have Long John Baldry, and when he talks about he couldn't have been more gay if he tried, I think we get a bit of a feel for that here. He's at his hairdresser's.
Well, but this right, but in the 60s, this would have been was flamboyant.
Right.
This would have been right,
and, you had like this feather bow collar. You could have seen anyone from Eric Clapton to John Lennon,
100%
Mick Jagger wearing something like this, right?
That's right. Yeah. And so I think the notion, again, it's hard to sort of wrap our heads around it, but there was a certain kind of radioactivity surrounding homosexuality, and it was career threatening, if not career ending. And so I just think, people were around the edges with this.
But
And
according to
this is
all
what makes it,
accounts,
yeah.
Baldry was not particularly careful about trying to be circumspect
Mm-hmm.
about
Oh,
it.
that's interesting.
And I think it speaks to his deep and committed network of friends
Oh, I think that's absolutely true.
that it more or less just did not have much of an effect on his career.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And so I think there was tremendous affection for him, and I think there was also then, as you're suggesting, this there were people were more than willing to protect him. I mean, he was beloved. He really was beloved.
Yes. This Miss Birdsong,
Mm-hmm.
just one of her pictures,
Do we
but
know why she was at the bag of nails that night?
because it was the
That's the
place
to
to,
me.
was the
It's the
place to be.
oddest
She
part.
was in England. It's the place to be. Is
It's
one of the
the
attractive
oddest part
ways
of the
to check.
story. There's the Supreme at the table. I didn't, that's odd. But okay, there she is.
Well, and you can't imagine that she would really have an opinion on his relationship. But there were
Oh, I
people
could.
there were
Well,
people in the know. There were Bernie was there and Long John Baldry was there. Baldry was supposed to be best man at the wedding, by the way.
well, yeah.
So if your
Well, this is
best
what
man is
apparently
telling you not to get married, then maybe
right. And this is what a best man would do, right? Would be that this if the best man had doubts about this relationship, it's the best man's duty to share those doubts. And so that's just what he's doing. And apparently I think that it's fair to say that Elton John only needed a fair amount of convincing. He was clearly leaning in that direction already, but this was effective. But this evening did, yeah, it had the outcome was what Elton John, I think, was kind of
right.
leaning, the
Well,
direction he was leaning.
it was just a bombardment. It's absurd. You don't really love her. You're just being a damned fool. You've got to call the wedding off. And Elton John says, quote, without that, it could have been an entirely different story. He really did change the course of my life, bless his heart, end quote.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
But not only did he require some convincing, he required some courage. So a lot of beer went into that, creating the courage. And according to Bernie Taupin, they staggered back to the apartment,
Yes.
arriving at 4 o'clock in the morning. Damn it!
Damn it!
And apparently that's pretty much what happened. 4:30, they arrived, got her out of bed, and said, "Look, this is the way it's going to be." And her response was, predictable, in the sense that she rejected the idea. This whole thing reminds me a little bit of the Seinfeld episode where George tries to break off the engagement. He says, "I'm going to break off the engagement." He comes back a couple hours later and, how'd it go? She said no.
She said no, right? Yeah, she's like, yeah, this jujitsu, she just absorbed it and just kind of, right. She
What do you
said
mean
no.
she said no? Yeah. Anyway, she
A little bit like that, for
she
sure.
threatened suicide. She, the whole 9 yards. And she did actually end up suing him for breach of promise, which was a thing in England
Well, yeah. Yeah.
back then. But
Well, I mean, one senses, having read the material about her and about this event, that she was caught a little off guard by this, which it is surprising on the retro. I mean, but she really was she was surprised.
well,
That's
yes.
and I mean, given his, well, this seems hard to believe, but She nearly had me roped and tied. I don't know what.
She nearly had me roped and tied. He was just a pawn, outplayed by a
Well,
dominating
okay.
team.
This is where the story for me goes off the rails. But this is the famous part of the tale that Elton John was being kind of railroaded, being kind of into a marriage that was wrong for so many reasons, and you have this domineering, if not somewhat overly physical woman
There,
taking it, essentially kind of taking.
by many accounts, she beat him. She was larger than he was, and by many accounts, she beat him.
And taking complete advantage of Reg Dwight.
Well, this is why she was surprised, because she had always managed to be in charge, be in control, to cow him, and the rebellion of the dwarf was unexpected.
It again, though. Yeah, it's I did. It's knowing what we know about Elton John, right? Who is famously ill-tempered, and well, mercurial, and I think a legendary pain in the ass by his own admission. This is where it stretched. This is where I find it a little difficult to completely sort of take in 100% the accounts of the men who observed this. So I'm not disputing the physical. I'm not disputing the fact that she might have been overbearing or was overbearing, but it's. I mean, everybody. I mean, Elton John gives as good as he gets.
Well, okay,
and always has. So I mean, but and I do think it's a little unfair given that her account really never came to light. The account of this event we know is embodied in the lyrics. That's all I'm saying.
She's been interviewed numerous times,
absolutely,
about this, and what she says about it is that it was a complete surprise to her, because as far as she knew, they had a happy relationship.
That's right. That is definitely what she said.
Yes. And that's pretty much her story.
That's pretty much it. I mean, she's been pretty consistent about that over the years.
And she blames Long John Baldry. Bernie Taupin thought she blamed him too. She never really mentions his name in that context.
Not in that context. I think she's hurt. I think she's wounded by the lyrics, and the lyrics have been, well, they're far from flattering. I mean, she's pilloried in the lyrics, but I mean, if you're going to take the lyrics as a kind of an account and a direct account of that evening, which I think it's one of the interesting things about the song is that it's one of the few Taupin John numbers that people have dissected in this way, much like people have with American Pie. This is this and this, all that kind of close reading. It's harsh.
Well, it lends itself to that, right? Because it clearly is talking about an actual incident. They're coming in the morning with the truck to take me home. Well, that happened. His stepdad came with his van. They packed up their few belongings, the record collections and so on, and drove back home.
Drove back home, and it is again. When you think about these two people, Taupin and John, and the kind of determination and just work ethic that they long demonstrated, the fact that they got themselves in this situation is just so peculiar.
Well, the commitment to each other at a time when certainly no success was crowning their
zero.
their team.
That's exactly right. that Dick James single tanked, and all that, right? It's like they're going nowhere.
They were going nowhere, but they had enough faith in each other that they stuck it out. And that, the first story of the story they tell of your song was talking about living with his parents, Elton John's parents, and Bernie wrote the lyrics at the breakfast table, and
that's right.
Elton wrote the music an hour later on the piano.
Yeah,
and that was it. But this was the post Linda.
That's right, and as you read, as you think about then their story together, this episode where they pack up and leave together is essentially the real. This is where it really starts. I mean, whatever they become, this is sort of the point of the real point of the genesis, right? It's not they're the commitment that they have for each other is clear. It is going to be unbroken, and there we go, right?
And a type of liberation, an important type of liberation took place.
I think that's yeah. And so when Elton John says that his life would have been different, it would have been. It had been radically different. And well, I mean, the lives of millions of people would have been different, because it seems unlikely that the Taupin John partnership would have endured, at least endured in the way that we understand it. I mean,
yeah,
it was a big moment. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that Taupin is a misogynist. I think that the lyrics are harsh. To his credit, when Taupin was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame a few nights ago, he took a shot at Jan Wenner, who, famously this past summer said, the women rockers of the early era were not as articulate as the men and all that. And, Taupin took open exception with that at the ceremony. It's just, again, I feel there's something about this song that is, here's the thing about the song from my perspective. They're punching down a little bit that the woman in question, maybe she had it coming, but the nature of the lyrics are so harsh that I do think it's kind of problematic, and it's unusual. It's an unusual number for them. The tenor of the song, there's a certain kind of vindictiveness to the song that I think is unsettling.
Well, here's my take on it. This album was autobiographical, clearly intended to be autobiographical, and we have a very specific episode from that autobiography here. We're talking about something that really happened. And I think if you're going to break up, especially with someone who tends to call the shots, you've got tanked up some liquid courage.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where you're going to vent everything that you have been eating up inside you up until then. So you're drunk, you're saying it's over, listen to me good, I'm sleeping with myself tonight. I don't think it reflects necessarily any sorts of long-term ill will. I think it talks about this is a situation where he clearly felt like he was in the web and had to break out, and part of that is is acting out.
Well, I think that's okay. I hear you. I think it's a generous interpretation, but I hear that. I hear it. It just there's no grace in the song at all. There's no, I mean, and that's, and there's so many of Elton John and Taupin's numbers. There's a certain kind of wry kind of sense of knowing. There's I don't know. To me, it's kind of a problematic song, and so I just have a hard time getting past that.
Well, I've always, I guess the part that always the focus for me was the thankfulness for
That's interesting.
someone
That's
who
interesting. Yeah,
actually came to my rescue and cared enough to
oh, that's interesting, right?
extract me from a bad situation.
Well, right, and hence the title, and right, I can, and I concede that, definitely. Yeah, I can. Right, that's well said.
But anyway, one of the great songs of the '70s, and
Yeah,
referring
well,
to
yeah,
referring to an actual incident. This is a little anecdote from Elton John's life.
this is exactly right. This is the so this these are the songs behind the stories behind the songs, and it's fascinating, right? There's a lot to it, and with this particular song, hopefully you've also gotten a sense of the Taupin John partnership, which really is. I mean, that's definitely the one of
It's
the
amazing.
subcurrents here.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really is. So good. Um, if you enjoyed this episode, and we hope you did, give us a thumbs up, or if you haven't done it yet, subscribe. You can do that right here. You can listen to another song story right up here.
That's right.
And
That's right.
we'll have a short playlist, including Long John Baldry's single big hit.
That's right.
Find that right here.
You betcha. Keep in mind that we're tweeting every day on Twitter X, and we have something interesting there every day, something new and something interesting. And so until next time, hope to see you soon.
Bye bye.